And so you have a dysfunctional group sitting in Braamfontein, trying to run an entity that's the size of Denmark, population-wise, and much more complex than Denmark, by the way.
That is the consequence of not taking action. So I think we need to internalize the locus of control and also think a bit more imaginatively about how we can offer these scalable solutions to state failure. We sit here in Northwood's house in Johannesburg, an emblem really of the greatness of old Johannesburg and the wealth that was created here. And we certainly have a beautiful view behind us of northern Johannesburg. But when you get down into the ground level, you see a lot of the symptoms of misgovernance.
Below all those trees.
Yeah. I often joke that Joburg is nice from far, but far from nice. But yeah, so, you know, and I think part of the conversation, I think, should be around the effects of centralization. That we have this vast metropolis that is equivalent in size to some other cities like Los Angeles or Mexico City, that is governed over there in Braamfontein, or rather misgoverned. And the mayor, I often challenge people to name who the mayor of Johannesburg is. And
don't ask me on camera.
Yeah, well, don't worry if you don't know. It's you're not alone in that. But he was refreshing in his honesty when he came to power. He said, "Listen, don't expect anything to change." I was grateful that he was upfront with the public, but now my request to him is that can I please no longer pay you my rates anymore, because
can we start trying to change something?
Yeah. You know, and I think that a lot of people, there are communities here, schools, businesses, institutions that people care about. And they don't just want to join the great backtrack down to Cape Town. Their lives are here, and they want to see a city that flourishes.
Yes.
But part of that is about saying, okay, well, actually, let's be honest, has this paradigm worked? The city of Joburg is only, as a political administrative unit, is only really about 25 years old.
Yeah.
The city itself is about 125 years old.
Also young.
Yeah. But it's very plural. It's very diverse. You know, regionally, geographically, and in terms of the different cultures that reside here. And so these neighborhoods, these communities, I think the only answer really should be that they should have more authority over their affairs. And so I'm a big proponent of actually splitting up the city of Johannesburg into smaller administrative units. But very importantly, that's not just a kind of a zoning question. They must actually have authority over rate collection and how those rates are spent. Otherwise, you're just going to get bureaucratic duplication, more costs. So I think we're starting to see the genesis of this in the city. We have initiatives like the Reimagine Randburg, for example, which has gone through serious service delivery problems. There are various security companies, ratepayers associations, community policing forums. A lot of people, civic-minded people, who care about the city and want to kind of help to ameliorate some of the worst effects of the failure that's coming from the center. But it's not just enough to kind of put band-aids everywhere. You actually need to change the entire governance model, and I think the moment for that is upon us.
I really love this direction of thinking, and of course, getting from here to there, there's hurdles. It's tricky. It's politically, you know, difficult. There's a whole bunch of things, but the direction of thinking, I think, is spot on. We think of this concept at Sakeliga of the idea of you get centralized scale, and that's typically something like a central point of failure. So it's very scalable in many ways, but it's a central point of failure. Eskom's a good example of that in the energy space. And then you get kind of decentralized non-scale. Okay, and that's like a solar panel on everyone's roof. It's decentralized, but that's not scalable. Everyone has to buy an individual unit of solar panel and battery and so on and rig it up, and it's very expensive, but it gives you some resilience. But there's something very beautiful in between, which is decentralized scale. And in the energy space, that would look something like non-Eskom power stations around the country, with local grids, regional grids, connecting into interprovincial grids and so on, but you're still getting meaningful scale. A lot of what you see in a place like Joburg is some really good initiatives. You get people trying to fix the potholes in Parkhurst, and you get people trying to solve crime issues in Edenvale or in their little local place. And some of those are fantastic. A lot of them, though, constitute something like decentralized non-scale. So they're expensive, they're hard to replicate, and they create nodes of resilience. But I think, and so they must continue, but I would love to see something building up into something like decentralized scale. And I think that's what you're talking about. Kind of these administrative zones that start to really be able to, in a more decentralized way, repair, restore, and start fixing Joburg, but with enough scale. So Randburg, whatever you call Randburg, whatever you demarcate Randburg to be, it's going to be a few 100,000 people. At least, right? This is a big area. I don't know, a place like Edenvale and Eden Glen, or Bedford View, those sorts of areas, or you got areas in the south. These all constitute seriously big areas. So already they would actually be tricky disaggregations to manage. But we have this ridiculous situation under this new dispensation where we've created these metros that have the same population as a country like
Small
Denmark,
countries,
with virtually with very, very poor executive capability, no kind of revenue raising capability, or very little, let's put it that way, very ineffective. And so you have a dysfunctional group sitting in Braamfontein, trying to run an entity that's the size of Denmark, population-wise, and much more complex than Denmark, by the way, probably, because it's high density. It's not culturally homogenous. You've got major wealth disparities. Denmark's a very kind of income equal country. So the complexities of trying to run Joburg are enormous. So yes, we have to start reimagining what metro renewal looks like. De jure on the books, it seems to me to be a very difficult concept to politically get there, because the cities were set up like they are for major redistributional purposes. Or, wealthy ratepayers in Sandhurst or somewhere in Joburg are going to subsidize Soweto or Alex or what have you. However, even if you concede that kind of redistribution imperative, I think you can still get it with a lot of this decentralization, quite frankly, by breaking up Ekurhuleni, breaking up Joburg, breaking up Pretoria. So I really like the direction of thinking. How we get from A to B, we haven't gamed that out clearly. Most of our work happens in small town municipalities where we're trying to create the jurisprudence and the legal precedent for real kind of recovery and for well-organized non-state entities to be able to take over core functions of those towns. My sense is that there could be a similar model in the metros, but at that kind of local intra-metro sort of level. I love the direction of thinking, and I think if the Free Market Foundation continues to pursue that line and advocate for it, and maybe even start thinking through the kind of avenues or the realistic channels, not just de jure, but maybe de facto, of how we get there, I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have the blueprint for that, and that's the role that we see ourselves playing. So people often ask me, well, I don't have time to go fill potholes on the weekend or join a night patrol, and I think that is a valid concern. And as proponents of free markets, we believe in a division of labor.
Correct.
So part of that is embracing privatization as well as decentralization. To say there's nothing fundamental about the reticulation of water that should be
and professionalizing these services. That's also where the scale comes from. So one guy fixing potholes that doesn't scale. So yes, by all means fix the pothole, but that really isn't a scaled solution, and it's very expensive per unit. So actually professionalizing something at a level of organization, and that means coordination, and that means a bit of politics, not in the political party voting sense necessarily. It just means that life's complex, and if you want to get things done at a reasonably aggregated scale, even just in these suburbs below us here, you're going to run into the WhatsApp groups that are angry, and you're going to run into people with different ideas of how to do things. And so there's a kind of local diplomacy to latch onto the broader topic we were talking about earlier that requires. And so yes, it's privatization meets kind of, I think, so it's for-profit execution capability meets some kind of non-profit structured entities that are non-state as well, that can kind of facilitate the quite complex coordination that's required at reasonable aggregation and scale. And so that might sound very abstract to the viewers. It is a bit, because to concretize that is difficult, and it means different things in different areas with different dynamics and different income groups and all sorts of things. But we're talking about meaningful, coordinated solutions that are outside the, that can be within the state paradigm to the extent that formal politics allows for this decentralization, if possible, but outside the state paradigm if necessary.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important mindset shift as well, that it's not just about voting harder and hoping that better political leaders come along that can now occupy these seats of governance, and then things will start to turn around. You actually have to build power outside of those structures in order to act as a check against that. And the consequences are quite dire. Just south of us, I mean, I am part of a running club that starts off in Park View, and we go for long runs through the Joburg CBD. And you see the consequences of capital flight in suburbs that used to be very prosperous. Hillbrow, Yeovil, Berea. These are places that once were hives of activity, and now you see many vacant buildings, hijacked buildings, dereliction. And that is the consequence of not taking action. So I think we need to internalize the locus of control, and also think a bit more imaginatively about how we can offer these scalable solutions to state failure.
Absolutely, and only footnote I want to add to that is, and it really latches onto what you're saying, is when we talk about creating decentralized centers of power, influence, and leverage, so important, because the question comes down to if you try and solve a problem and someone else can come and stop you from doing it, you haven't amassed sufficient power to in turn say to them, no, actually we will solve this. You're out of jurisdiction here. That gets into grey and sticky and tricky areas around the law and so on, which is also why when we do a lot of this work in smaller towns, it's a two-pronged strategy. There's an organized entity that can execute on mission, and there's a litigation strategy in parallel to that creates the space through real concrete litigation that allows the space for these entities to work and to start taking authority in these towns for the public interest, for the good of everyone, because having water is better than not having water. There's no debate about that. It's not a political issue. Solving these problems is better than not solving them. And so a good litigation strategy can work alongside a really hands-on kind of practical strategy. I think a lot of times we see a good, lots of chutzpah and gusto with the practical strategy.
A lot of very active WhatsApp groups.
Yeah, active WhatsApp groups, and even people getting on the ground and solving some physical, real things on the ground there. But I've also heard stories, and probably just a few hundred meters from here, where residents have tried to fix things, and the city has come and tried to stop them at their own expense from fixing things. And in this particular instance, this little group actually pushed back, got their own private security to kind of surround them while they literally fixed potholes in Joburg. So it was like a contest versus between the guys who wanted to fix the potholes and the guys who were saying, you're not allowed to, but we're also not going to do it. Really crazy situations. But imagine those kinds of efforts Imagine 1,000 of them happening in Joburg today. The city cannot react to that. And so, you know, we're getting there. We got to try and really figure out the paths and mechanisms to this kind of outcome.
Yeah, nobody wants to see state failure, but there's also an opportunity there.
Yeah.
That as the state becomes weaker, independent civil society groups from the bottom up can start to fill the void left by the retreating state. And we have a choice there as well. That this can either be a disorderly process where you have criminal gangs and syndicates coming and taking over and filling that void, or you can have responsible civic organizations that are rule-bound but also bold in acquiring power and building value for the future for all South Africans.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's what our respective institutions, our organizations are trying to achieve. And we hope that many South Africans can see the value there and support our cause.